Abortion is in the news right now, unavoidably so, whether we want it or not. The reality is that attacks on women's right to choose in Alabama and in Ohio and in other U.S. states, along with comments by PC MPPs like Sam Oosterhoff right here in Ontario saying that he wants to make abortion unthinkable in our lifetimes, has brought the issue to the forefront like it hasn't been in a good long time. For the first time since the 1970s in the United States, it may be the case that the right to have an abortion is actually endangered. That the new Alabama anti-abortion law could go to the Supreme Court, and given the Supreme Court's conservative composition, could actually be overturned. That the right to an abortion could go back to being a quote-unquote states' right issue and have it banned in dozens of states potentially. These are some dark times. And we have forces here in Canada that want to do the same. Conservative forces that want to do the same. That would try to find any means possible to either end or restrict the right to abortion. But it's not just conservatives and Republicans we have to worry about. And I think we need to talk about somebody who's had a bit of a bump in the polls recently. And that's Elizabeth May and the Green Party. Elizabeth May and the Greens are often seen, sort of by default, as a left-of-center party. That we just assume that because they're environmentalist, they're also progressives or leftists in a general sense. And I don't know if that's true. As we've seen with the Ontario Green Party, they've stomped on the charter rights of workers. In British Columbia, they fought against workers' rights and they fought against minimum wage increases, the Green Party. We don't necessarily know about the Green Party's positions in PEI as they'll act, with a caucus. But in general, they weren't that different than the Liberals and Conservatives in their platform. The Green Party isn't really that progressive of a party. And Elizabeth May has some troubling views on abortion, at least historically. And she's tried to walk them back over time. But given that abortion rights, given that women's rights to choose are under attack like they haven't been before in a long time, people like Elizabeth May and her Green Party need to face greater scrutiny. And Elizabeth May, back in 2006, basically said that abortion makes her quote-unquote queasy, that when women talk about having the right to choose, it makes her uncomfortable, basically arguing that she's talked women out of having abortions. And while she says, ultimately I support the right to have an abortion because I worry about, the dangers of banning it, I worry how that'll cause back alley abortions and whatnot. She has ultimately said that she feels that women shouldn't have a quote-unquote frivolous right to an abortion. So Elizabeth May, it's not fair to call her anti-choice. I would say that would be an unfair characterization. But it should be said that their position really isn't that progressive. Because your position on abortion isn't just, will you ban it or will you allow it? That's not the be-all end-all of the issue. Because abortion is so stigmatized, and it's so contentious, and it creates so many difficulties for women who choose to have it or choose not to have it, that it's about more than the pure legality, and we have to talk a bit about the framing. And Elizabeth May's framing of abortion is troubling, saying that it makes her queasy or uncomfortable, saying that people talking about the right to choose makes her uncomfortable, talking about how she has personally talked women out of abortions, talking about how women, quote-unquote, shouldn't be frivolous with their right to choose. All of these things paint narratives that abortion may be legal but it's wrong, or that abortion may be legal but it's a very serious decision that women have to think very hard about. All of these things feed into narratives that empower anti-choice voices. For instance, let's talk specifically about her claim that women shouldn't have a frivolous right to abortions. What she's saying there, again, she's not saying we should ban abortions. She's saying that we need to have abortions because she worries about the consequences of a society where the right to abortion is banned. As many people in the States have noted, you don't ban abortions, you ban safe abortions. Elizabeth May makes that point, and she should be credited for that. But when she says, I don't think this should be a frivolous right, what she's implying is that some women at least, maybe for her many women, just choose to get an abortion like they choose to get a manicure or a pedicure. That it's just something on a whim, one day they're like, I guess I'll get an abortion today. or that it's this idea that women are just making decisions about their lives and bodies and futures and families that are without thought, that are without care, and it's this idea that, women can only have an abortion when we can be sure that they were very serious and very clear about their intentions. That notion that the issue here is that we have women just recklessly getting abortions. And this might just sound like Elizabeth May trying to talk about how, for some women, this is a serious decision and it causes great social and personal turmoil. But it feeds into the Republican American narrative. It feeds into that GOP narrative from down south, which is that when they're not trying to ban abortions, they're trying to put restrictions on it. And they'll often put restrictions based on various notions, whether it's that, as we've seen with Ohio and other places, the heartbeat law, that once the heart beats, it's clearly a sign of humanity and we must respect the life of the unborn child, or whether it's fetal viability, which is a concept that has perhaps more credibility but is nonetheless a kind of restriction on abortion. But here for us, and tying into Elizabeth May's comments about frivolity, about frivolous abortions, quote unquote, is these mandatory waiting periods, or these notions that you have to have the mandatory ultrasound. The argument is that these women just haven't thought it through. And if they take the extra days, or if they see the ultrasound, the reality is some of them will realize they've been rash and have made a mistake. If only they were a little less frivolous. It's the same argument Elizabeth May is making. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Elizabeth May wants to see mandatory ultrasounds or waiting periods before abortions. It doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is her narrative ties in exactly into the motivations of anti-choice conservatives. So again, I want to make this clear. I'm not saying Elizabeth May is anti-choice, but I'm saying that Elizabeth May's discourse around choice is poisonous, it's counterproductive, and it feeds conservative anti-choice narratives. It could very well be used to justify the very attacks that people like Jason Kenney and Sam Oosterhoff and others will be planning over the coming years and decades. Elizabeth May's narratives could be directly responsible for attacks on abortion. And this just goes to a final point, which is that the Green Party right now is having a bit of a bump in the polls. They've seen success in British Columbia, New Brunswick, PEI, a bit in Ontario, and the reality is the party hasn't faced scrutiny. Everyone just assumes they're an environmentalist party, and everyone assumes that they're a progressive party. But when it comes to Indigenous people, or workers, or in this case, potentially, women's rights to choose, the Green Party should leave progressives concerned. And it should leave them demanding more of that party in terms of what their ultimate vision is. Not just for the environment, but for the people living in that environment. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you subscribed and liked it and left a comment. I would also appreciate it if you supported me on Patreon, which helps me to improve both the quality and quantity of the content. And I want to know what you guys think. What do you think about Elizabeth May's comments? Do you feel that they are concerning to you? Do you feel that this questions your ability to support the Green Party? Do you feel that her positions trying to clarify this, saying that she definitely supports the right to choose, are enough? Or do you feel that we need to see more from her and her party clarifying where they stand on this key issue? I want to know what you guys think. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.